Plus, read The Atlantic and so much more. Get started. Science, Why a hedge fund success. Robinson Meyer Jr. Jim Young, Reuters. Every week, our lead climate reporter brings you the. Here's a question that has recently become surprisingly important in the battle against climate change. What is a company? There's a legal answer, of course. A company is an incorporated entity representing an association of persons, legal and natural, usually chartered under state law, blah 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 blah. But a company can be, and typically is, any of the following: a hierarchical social unit, a nested series of bank accounts, a tightly controlled brand identity, a stock ticker symbol. A company, to paraphrase an ancient author who knew something about distributed organizations, is not one member, but many. It can be difficult even to say who controls a company. Most large corporations are led by a chief executive officer, who is hired and managed by a board of directors, who are in turn elected by shareholders. But the separation of powers here is not as clear-cut as it may seem. A board might be very pliant to the CEO, or nobody but management's picks might run for a board seat. Under United States law, 99% of a company's shareholders can vote against a director candidate, and if nobody runs against that person, they still will win. This discussion matters because, as you have likely heard, a hedge fund named Engine No. 1 executed a soft coup last week against one of the country's most powerful companies, ExxonMobil. Despite controlling 0.02% of Exxon, Engine No. 1 placed two activist investors on the oil company's board of directors. The fund argued that Exxon is unprepared for decarbonization and the energy transition, and that it should slowly shift away from its fossil fuel-dominated business model. Some of the largest institutional investors in the country, as well as a slew of smaller investors, agreed with the fund and voted to throw out a minority of the existing board. This vote is a landmark. It shows that major institutional investors, who have long goaded oil companies to do more about climate change, are ready to start punishing executives over their failure to act. And for their first target, investors chose ExxonMobil, the country's largest oil company, the biggest spin-off of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust, and the palace at the center of Big Oil's empire. It's monumental. Nell Minow, the vice chair of Value Edge Advisors and a longtime strategist in proxy fights, told me, "There's never been anything like this. Engine No. 1 is the kid who said the king is not wearing anything." Exxon got plenty of warning before the coup, and looking back, we can discern a supertanker's worth of pride before the fall. When Darren Woods, Exxon CEO, met with Engine No. 1 in January, he seemingly brushed off many of its concerns. When Exxon's favored candidates for the board started to lose last week, Woods paused the shareholder meeting for an hour and made pleading calls to major investors. He lost anyway. Losing has been something of a habit for Woods lately. If Exxon had been a dynamic, resilient company, if it were printing profits from its investments in Texas shale, then it would not have faced this rebellion. But the entire oil sector is underperforming. Exxon lost $22 billion last year, its worst performance in 4 decades. Among retail investors, Exxon is especially prized for the dividend it pays out to its shareholders every quarter. Last year, for the first time since 1982, the dividend did not increase, and analysts have started to fret that the company may soon cut it, which has never happened before. What distinguishes dying companies from those that manage a turnaround, Minow said, is their failure to metabolize bad news. Exxon has, in its case, actively tried to suppress bad news. During the 1990s and 2000s, it was one of the largest and deepest supporters of climate denialism. The company's insistence that oil will win the day reminds Minow of when she ran a proxy fight against Eastman Kodak. "They said, people will always want film," she told me, astonished. "A lot of companies are like Wile E. Coyote. They run off the cliff and they're suspended for a bit, and they don't realize nothing is below them." The current board, which, again, still consists mostly of management's favored directors, will decide where the new activist directors serve. The board is divided into committees, including a compensation committee, an audit committee, and a nominating committee. What committees do they put the new directors on? "This is how we're gonna know whether Exxon has gotten the message or not," Minow said. "If not, next year's shareholders meeting could be even more eventful." Engine No. 1 prevailed because it won the votes of 2 different types of institutional investors, one old, one new. First, it attracted the support of large state pension funds that try to act in the best interest of the entire market. Second, it won support from newer financial firms such as State Street and BlackRock, which sell large, popular, low-fee index funds that track much of the market. Because those companies sop up so much of professional American savings, and because they try to buy a little of every company, they own single-digit percentages of Exxon and can push it to act in the long-term interest of the broader market. BlackRock, which has cast itself as the climate-concerned institutional investor, has also been pressured by activists to align its proxy votes with its green marketing. Working together, these funds brought Exxon to heel. Which is a little weird. How many times have activists argued that capitalism is incompatible with solving climate change? Yet last week, Exxon shareholders, that is, the owners of capital, acted to rein in Exxon's managers and insiders. Capital has apparently been recruited into the fight against climate change. Wall Street is. A la Mothra versus Godzilla, battling big oil. If that's surprising, it shows how tangled the politics of decarbonization has become. And it shows the difficult line that the Biden administration has to walk as it tries to make decarbonization an inevitability. Planet is a project of the Atlantic. Supported by the HHMI. Our editor's guide to sign up for the Bloomberg. Exxon may be corporate America's canary in the coal mine, by Tim Quinson, June 1, 2021. 6 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Updated at June 1, 2021. 6 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. An ExxonMobil refinery in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Photographer, Barry Lewis in Pictures. Sign up to receive the Bloomberg Green newsletter in your inbox every weekday. Last week's shakeup of ExxonMobil Corp's board of directors is by most accounts a clear signal to corporate America that ambivalence and greenwashing will no longer be enough when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. The California State Teachers Retirement System, CalSTRS, called the election of at least 2 new members to Exxon's board against the wishes of management historic. Moody's Investor Service said the shareholder vote, which cannot be appealed, likely presages similar results in future board elections at other U.S. oil companies. And Andrew Bahar, chief executive officer of USAO, a corporate accountability nonprofit that's acted on the behalf of shareholders since 1992 and filed 21 climate-related resolutions with Exxon over the past decade, called the vote a turning point. When companies don't listen, shareholders will take action, Bahar said. For over a decade, Exxon has ignored our requests for capital discipline and climate transparency. This is long overdue. All board directors should be on notice that if they don't fulfill their duty of independent oversight, their tenure will be challenged. Until last week, it was always assumed that an investor would need to hold a 3% to 5% stake in a company to run an activist campaign, he said. That myth has been overturned. Engine number 1 owns only about 0.02% of Exxon shares, but it was able to win support from the 3 largest U.S. investment firms, BlackRock Incorporated, Vanguard Group and State Street Corp., and the nation's 3 biggest pension funds, including CalSTRS. Now it is clear that you don't have to be Carl Icahn or even Gordon Gekko to force change, Bahar said. However, having a large stake can help when it comes to wielding power. If BlackRock CEO Larry Fink called on every company to adopt a Paris-compliant climate transition plan and reported against these targets every year, or said we are going to vote against your board, every company would do it overnight. Before last week's boardroom smackdown, Exxon was already under increasing financial pressure to transform its business model. The Coalition United for a Responsible Exxon Cure, which includes as USAO, puts it pretty bluntly. Exxon's current direction is premised on outdated assumptions about high oil prices, demand, and margins that are incompatible with the reality of climate change and the inevitable transition to renewable energy sources. As a result, Exxon continues to make massive capital investments in projects that will, in our view, destroy shareholder value and that operate inefficiently, exacting a toll on profitability. To support these investments and an unsustainable dividend, the company today is burdened with the highest debt levels in its history. We are concerned that shareholders' dividends have never been more at risk. In a report last week, analysts at Moody's wrote that major oil producers now face higher credit risk because of last week's court ruling against Royal Dutch Shell plc, in which judges ruled the oil giant was violating human rights by not sufficiently fighting global warming. The shareholder vote at Exxon and a decision at Chevron Corp made things even worse for big oil, as activists move more aggressively to force companies to be more serious about addressing their greenhouse gas emissions. The increasing potential for more stringent investor climate and emissions-related investment thresholds, Moody's warned, are likely to lead to higher capital costs and diminished access to capital for oil companies. The industry will encounter heightened investor pressure to decarbonize more quickly than companies are currently planning, Moody said. Big Oil will have to shift its business away from oil generation and toward renewable energy sources, meaning outsized spending may be required for acquisitions, research and development, and other capital expenditures. At the same time, large investors have said they're committed to reducing their fossil fuel-related equity positions and plan to hold energy companies accountable if they don't transition away from oil, coal, and other pollutants. The Exxon vote last week proved that little investors are doing just that. Let's see if the big players follow suit. Sustainable finance in brief. Kathy Matsu, photographer. Akio-kan, Bloomberg. Former Goldman Sachs Japan Vice Chair Kathy Matsu is starting an ESG venture capital fund. What climate science loses when it doesn't have enough black researchers? U.S. insurers rank lowest when it comes to climate biodiversity. European Union moves to close ivory trade loopholes, but it may be too little too late for the world's elephants. Financing seaweed farms could be a solution to stop coastal dead zones triggered by agricultural waste. Address, 35%. Bloomberg.com. Secure and validated connection. Skip to content. What if a real estate company could help save the planet? Discover more. Advertisement. Toggle menu. Bloomberg. Green. Subscribe. Oceans. Coast. Address, Bloomberg. What if metro stations could create coastal debt? Address, Bloomberg.com. Secure and validated connection. Coastal dead zones are multiplying. Seaweed may be a solution. Scientists say a massive expansion of aquaculture could slow the ecological and economic destruction wrought by agriculture and urban waste. Virginia Gulen, May 27, 2021. 12:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time plus 5:30 May 27, 2021. 12:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time plus 5:30. May 27, 2021. 12:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time plus 5:30 in May 2019. The Mississippi Address, Coast. In May 2019, the Mississippi River dumped a daily average of more than 5,000 metric tons of nitrate and 800 metric tons of phosphorus into the Gulf of Mexico. Coastal debt. Coastal debt. Coastal dead zones are multiplying. Seaweed may be a solution. Scientists say a massive expansion of aquaculture could slow the ecological and economic destruction wrought by agriculture and urban waste. Virginia Guin, May 27, 2021. 12:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time plus 5:30, May 27, 2021. 12:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time plus 5:30. In May 2019, the Mississippi River dumped a daily average of more than 5,000 metric tons of nitrate and 800 metric tons of phosphorus into the Gulf of Mexico, the highest levels in the last 40 years. These excess nutrients from Midwest farm fertilizer and animal waste robbed the waters off Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas of oxygen, fueling toxic algal blooms and causing what's come to be known as a dead zone. The size varies each year, but this particular patch's 5-year average hovers at about 5,000 square miles. To date, a U.S. government task force has made little if any progress toward the goal of reducing it to 2,000 square miles. Coastal dead zones are multiplying. Seaweed may be a solution, scientists say. A massive expansion. Virginia Guin, May 27. Coast May May In May 2019, the Mississippi River dumped a daily average of more than 5,000 metric tons of nitrate and 800 metric coastal dead. Coastal dead zone. Science. Virginia. May 20. In May 20, the highest levels in the last 40 years. These excess nutrients from Midwest farm fertilizer and animal waste robbed the waters off Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas of oxygen, fueling. The size varies each year, but this particular patch's 5-year average hovers at about 5,000 square miles. To date, a U.S. government task force has made little if any progress toward the goal of reducing it to 2,000 square miles. Explore dynamic updates of the Earth's key data points. Open the data dash. -5.82%. Today's Arctic ice area versus historic average parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. Renewable power investment worldwide in Q2 2020. Soccer pitches of forests lost this hour. Most recent data. Jaipur, India. Most polluted air today. In sensor range, million metric tons of greenhouse emissions. Most recent annual data plus 0.78 degrees Celsius. December 2020 increase in global temperature versus 1900s average 39%. Carbon-free net power in the U.S. Most recent data. For environmental experts, the problem seems intractable. Known as eutrophication, dead zones are proliferating all over the globe. There are currently over 700 coastal areas worldwide that are either dead zones or negatively impacted by runoff. While the U.S. suffers mostly from agricultural waste, urban wastewater is the main culprit in South America, Asia, and Africa. Every year, they inflict $3.4 billion in economic damage in Europe and the U.S. alone due to lost tourism and fishing, declining property values, water treatment, and adverse health impacts. In the last 10 years, 85 U.S. communities have spent more than $1 billion combined to prevent or treat algal blooms. Among the hardest hit are at the mouth of the Mississippi, where the constant ejection of waterborne waste from America's heartland decimates local seafood and tourism industries. But there may be a solution on the horizon. A new study makes the case that the Gulf of Mexico could trade in its slimy algae for silky green seaweed, which if planted in sufficient numbers could soak up much of that damaging waste. The concept is early days and implementation further afield. But given the lack of progress on other fronts, said study co-author Phoebe Racine, there's no other option but to consider alternative practices. Algal blooms can inflict economic damage from lost tourism and fishing revenue, declining property values, water treatment costs, and adverse health impacts. Photographer Joe Riedel. Getty Images. Cultivating multiple species of seaweed in less than 1% of Gulf of Mexico waters could potentially help the U.S. achieve pollution reduction goals that have been out of reach, said Racine, a researcher at the University of California in Santa Barbara. She and her colleagues have already mapped suitable areas for seaweed farms in the Gulf and found more than 24,000 square miles of potentially available sites. Seaweed aquaculture dates back 1,700 years to China. These days, nations such as Indonesia and the Philippines, along with China and South Korea, lead the world in this arena. In South Korea, where aquaculture has grown 300% over the last 30 years, an intensive effort has demonstrated its usefulness as a waste reduction tool. As one of the biggest producers of seaweed in Asia, where 99% of all seaweed is cultivated, the country has at least 2,144 seaweed farms covering a total of 350 square miles, according to Jane Kim, a marine scientist based at Incheon National University. That's an area roughly the size of Dallas. Farms of 3 major seaweed species and 2 shellfish species, all filter feeders that require no additional food, took up the equivalent of 5.7% of the carbon dioxide and 8.6% of the nitrogen discharges from all wastewater treatment plants in Korea, according to a study conducted by Kim. Seaweed aquaculture dates back 1,700 years. Photographer Hector Redemel. AFP. Getty Images. Key to the success of seaweed farming is its increasing commercial potential, and that these aquatic plants can soak up excess nitrogen and phosphorus and turn it into not only human food, but an expanding array of additional commercial uses. The most cultivated seaweeds include red or brown algal species or kelps. Some are used to make culinary thickening agents or agar to culture bacteria in laboratory settings. Others are dried into sheets called nori, used to make sushi rolls. While sugar kelp can be used as a sweetener, kelps are also used in toothpastes, shampoos, frozen foods, and even pharmaceuticals. Making seaweed farms profitable will be a critical consideration to promoting them as a solution to agricultural and urban waste. Asia has strong existing demand for seaweed. Human consumption, including everything from sushi rolls to broth to salad, is the biggest market for harvested seaweed, said Kim. But growing demand can also be seen among the cosmetics and fertilizer industries, as well as feed for farmed seafood. We have more than 50% of kelp production going to abalone feed, said Kim. In Maine, kelp farmers harvested 482,000 wood pounds of seaweed in 2020, worth just shy of $300,000. Photographer Gregory Rick. Portland Press Herald. Getty Images. Mass aquaculture faces some significant obstacles, not least of which is its labor-intensive nature. Seaweed cultivation relies on either lab-based nurseries to grow and attach juvenile seaweed to netting or line, or transferring cuttings from mature plants to a submerged line. Harvesting usually involves multiple people on boats cutting seaweed out of the water. Globally, demand for seaweed is projected to double to $30 billion by 2025. In the U.S., however, the seaweed market is relatively small. Gretchen Grebe, an aquaculture scientist based at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, said seaweed farming in America is still very much in its R&D phase. She's been studying coastal seaweed aquaculture in Maine, where in 2020 kelp farmers harvested 482,000 wood pounds, worth just shy of $300,000, also in Maine. A company received $11 million in seed funding to grow kelp, and then sink it into the deep ocean for carbon credits. Racine contends that carbon credit markets used to slow pollution could be used more fully to encourage seaweed extraction of pollutants, including nitrogen, carbon, and even heavy metals from coastal areas. In the Faroe Islands, seaweed is cultivated for use in food, cosmetics, and research projects, source courtesy of ocean rainforest. Using seaweed aquaculture to remediate any substantial quantities of nutrient pollution will require a massive expansion. The current scale of cultivation won't even make a dent, Grebe said. In the U.S., the states have wildly divergent regulations when it comes to aquaculture permitting. While it's comparatively easy to get a seaweed farm permit in Maine and Alaska, in California it requires negotiating a maze of overlapping regulations. Offshore operations are where the promise lies, said Bailey Moritz, Program Director for World Wildlife Fund. Our goal is to see seaweed grow in a way that will have meaningful impacts on nutrient depletion, and scale is necessary for that. WWF invested in ocean rainforest in Faroe Islands, an operation that designed rigs to withstand offshore weather conditions. But large-scale, offshore seaweed operations are still at least a decade away in the U.S., she predicted, and likely only if biofuels, bioplastics, and animal feed create enough demand. And while the U.S. Department of Energy has invested $35 million into researching seaweed-based biofuel development, with pilot projects starting in Puerto Rico. To date, the Army Corps of Engineers has granted only one permit for a seaweed project in the Gulf of Mexico, according to Nacker Nobles, the spokesperson for the Army Corps of Engineers. Noble said further hurdles include citing Endangered Species Act consultations, design plans that prevent entanglement of sea animals, and public education. Seaweed has enormous promise, said Grebe. But scientists are quick to point out that it's imperative to reduce upstream waste inputs as well. We're asking a lot of seaweed aquaculture to take care of the nutrient waste we dump into the Gulf, she said. Apple News Plus, read The Atlantic and so much more. Get started Planadora News for $9.99 a month until canceled. Books. Swimming in the Wild Will Change You, One Man's Journey Through Public Waterways, whether sparkling or dirty or algae-filled, challenges us to look differently at the commons. Annalise Chin, May 27, 2021, some months ago. As the weather was first turning warm, I was out walking along the Mill River in New Haven when I saw a young man emerge from the water. He appeared to have gone for a swim wearing nothing more than boxer briefs. The sight was shocking. The river had barely thawed, and I'd always thought the unspoken rule about urban rivers was that you didn't get into them, especially not half naked. This particular stretch at the base of East Rock Park looked idyllic enough, with willows and elms growing along its banks, but around the bend, the water passed through an industrial area with rotting factories and massive dunes of road salt. I asked him why he had decided to swim there, given that a year ago, a sewage spill had dumped more than 2 million tons of waste into the river, and the Long Island Sound, and signs had been posted telling people not to get close. I imagined he would address my surprise head-on. But his response was remarkably unerotic. This was here, and I felt like swimming, he said dreamily. I wanted to ask him whether he was worried about getting a rash, or cholera, but didn't. After he left, I put my hand in the water and considered the river anew. Could I imagine myself going for a swim in this spot? I might have once filed away swimming in the Mill River under classic case of adolescent insanity. But a year of quarantining has revealed that all kinds of previously unthinkable hobbies are viable, even welcome forms of leisure. One unforeseen boon of the pandemic has been a newfound attunement to the local, as restricted travel has forced us to tap into our immediate surroundings. Many of us have spent the past year getting to know our block, our park, researching our neighborhood's histories and monuments, its flora and fauna, perhaps wild swimming, the practice of swimming in rivers, ponds, and lakes, which I had caught this young man engaging in, could be a new opportunity to pay more attention to the waterways close to home. Wild swimming is a splashy term for what humans have always done, but the custom was given full shape and expression with the publication of one seminal book. During a drenching rainstorm in the summer of 1996, while taking a swim in the moat behind his Elizabethan farmhouse, the environmentalist and writer Roger Deakin conceived an idea to swim through the waterways of Britain. I wanted to follow the rain on its meanderings about our land to rejoin the sea, he wrote, to break out of the frustration of a lifetime doing links, inspired by John Cheever's story The Swimmer, in which the protagonist, Ned Merrill, swims home via a quasi-subterranean stream of backyard swimming pools. Deakin began to imagine a similarly linked byway of lakes, rivers, marshes, and swimming holes across the country. In his early 50s and mourning the end of a long love, Deakin yearned for a medieval quest. Like Merlin's transforming King Arthur into a fish as part of his education, swimming would be a way of getting under the skin of things, of learning something new. Yuba River, Penn Valley, California. The resulting journey became the subject of Roger Deakin's first book, Waterlog, A Swimmer's Journey Through Britain, which is now being published stateside for the first time. In the UK, Waterlog's publication galvanized a movement. According to Sport England, a national organization that promotes physical exercise, Some 500,000 people in England were regularly taking dips in frigid lakes and streams as of 2020. Wild swimming is so popular that it has sprouted its own industry. Bookstores abound with swimwears by devotees who claim that the practice does wonders for their health. Today, you can take guided swim tours across the country or even rent out Deacon's Suffolk home and swim in his moat, an experience the New Yorker writer Rebecca Mead described last year as starkly beautiful. Wild swimming's popularity may be due, in large part, to the seductions of Deacon's writing. The liveliness of his prose disarms the skeptic into shaking off natural doubts and hesitancies. His voice is as encouraging as a camp counselor's. Before his untimely death in 2006, at age 63, Deacon had been a co-founder of the environmental activist group Common Ground, and made a life's work of promoting outdoor activities such as walking, swimming, and biking. He believed that the most effective way to bond people to the landscape was to engage the pleasure principle. The essayist Olivia Lang has written that Deacon's greatest gift, indeed his legacy, is to make the ecologically minded life a matter of gleeful fun. Arguably, Waterlog is a memoir in name, but a manifesto indeed, inspiring action not by appealing to the reader's sense of duty or guilt, but by showing how joyful swimming outdoors can be. Waterlog is, at its most basic, what the title suggests, an assiduous log of each of Deacon's encounters with water. But it's also a beautiful ode to the act of swimming outdoors that morphs into a rousing reminder of the importance of caring for the commons. Through ecstatic and exacting descriptions of his mini-swims, Deacon introduces the reader both to the pleasures of outdoor swimming and to the richness of the natural landscape. He paddles about in sun-warmed tide pools and squelches in tidal mud. He body surfs around boulders in clear rushing rivers and snorkels with salmon migrating upstream. One section about descending, or potholing, into the evocatively named Hellgill Canyon made me stab at the page margins with anxious exclamation marks. Deacon recreates the sensuousness and sublimity of his swims so well that at times I found myself holding my breath. From water level, I observed the mating dragonflies joined in flight like refueling aircraft, and the random progress of the dandelion clocks that drifted on the thermals over the moat. Deacon observes, I kept meeting a solitary whirligig beetle making its way from one end to the other in a series of loops and circles like calligraphy. An eel is so mottled and green and varnished in mucus it could be an uprooted plant. A mandrake root come to life. This is travel at its most intimate, among invisible denizens one would normally ignore. After reading, you'd be hard-pressed to waste time enduring the boredom of swimming laps in a sterile pool. Waterlog is simultaneously a travelogue, a history, and an environmental treatise, as each swim provides an occasion to delve into local and natural lore. Deacon haunts the Cambridge University Library's map room, tracking down esoteric swims and researching how certain bodies of water around the UK were once used. A trip to Malvern, a spa town, allows him to explore a Victorian version of hydrotherapy. Patients were wrapped in wet cloth and dunked in cold water before breakfast, marched through the forest for an open-air shower before lunch, then submerged in a cold bath before dinner. Charles Darwin was a famous patient. He first arrived in Malvern depressed and unable to write, but became so convinced of hydrotherapy's efficacy that he returned 3 more times. Dorset Quarry, Dorset, Vermont. Deacon often finds himself searching for water that no longer matches its past description. Around Cambridge, hunting for Aristotle's well, an unusually pure and cold well that Samuel Pepys once drank from as an undergraduate during the summer of 1653, Deacon discovers only a soggy field and an ancient brick structure like a buried egg, covered with a concrete lid. The Grana was once clear, but too many fertilizers now leach off the adjacent land, and the river is choked in waterweed. Along the banks of the Dart, people used to pass the time watching otters play, but chemicals from a carpet factory polluted the water, and the otters died. A deep sense of loss pervades these scenes. Although Deacon writes evocatively of his many swims in pristine places, his less salubrious excursions were the ones I found most moving. Dare to make a commitment, he seems to be urging himself as he descends into the chocolate water of an urban canal. He makes himself swim in the arsenic-contaminated Red River, and in mucky bays possibly filled with E. coli and excrement. One of the most bittersweet chapters describes his swim in the inimitable River Lark, which old-timers remember as sparkling and transparent, so clean that baptisms were once performed there. When Deacon visits, it has been polluted, culverted, and degraded beyond recognition. He follows the river as it flows through a Tesco parking lot. I witnessed the public humiliation of the Jordan of the Fens. By the Bury St. Edmunds Tesco, I sat down and wept. At its core, Waterlog is animated by a desire to protect waterways not just from various forms of environmental degradation, but from what Deacon perceives to be the degrading forces of governmental overreach and privatization. To demonstrate the former, Deacon visits members of one family that has been swimming in a local river for generations, who appear hale and lively despite repeated warnings from the Environment Agency that their activities are unsafe. In a letter, which Deacon quotes at length, the agency cites the possible risks: sewage effluent, leptospires, bacteria carried in animal urine that can result in death, and dangerous currents. The letter sums up: I would strongly recommend that children are discouraged from swimming in the river but are taken to a local swimming pool instead. By juxtaposing state bureaucratic speech with a scene of ordinary people reveling for free in a familiar stretch of water, Deacon is attempting to right our upside-down notion that swimming in sanctioned places is the only proper way to swim. He writes, most of us live in a world where more and more places and things are signposted, labeled, and officially interpreted. There's something about all this that is turning the reality of things into virtual reality. It is the reason why walking, cycling, and swimming will always be subversive activities. They allow us to regain a sense of what is old and wild in these islands, by getting off the beaten track and breaking free of the official version of things. Left, Krause Springs, Spicewood, Texas. Right, Natural Bridges, Vallecito, California. Throughout the book, Deacon good-humoredly waves off water bailiffs and coast guards and other well-meaning authorities who are constantly swooping in to tell him that his swimming is prohibited. But he never acknowledges the validity of the official position. The cautious reader knows that there are times when swimming in a polluted river or harbor might present a public health risk. The CDC estimates that 1 million cases of leptospirosis occur annually worldwide, the majority of them in tropical or subtropical regions. 59,000 end in death. Though deaths are rare in the US and UK, they have been reported. In 2010, the British Olympic rowing champion Andy Holmes died of Weil's disease, caused by leptospira bacteria, which may have entered his body through blisters on his hands. Waterlog has too much evangelical fervor for its cause to address these risks. Deacon swims are as much exercises of political will as they are exercises of personal wellness. A defiant plunge in the River Itchen, for instance, a body of water that, at the time of Deacon's visit, had been repurposed for leisure enterprises such as trout fishing, available only to the paying elite, sets the stage for a central ideological debate about public access. In the memorable scene, Deacon trespasses and is confronted, predictably, by a river keeper and an angry porter with a big dog. Does that fence mean anything to you? The two men shout. Caught dripping wet and standing half naked in a nettle patch, Deacon holds his ground. But surely, I said sweetly, we should all have access to swim in our rivers just as we should be free to walk in our own countryside. Don't they belong to all of us? The river keeper practically fell off. His bike, the porter, flushed a deeper strawberry and allowed the Alsatian a little closer to my person. The Atlantic. Apple News Plus. Read The Atlantic. We lost civil rights icons. They lost friends. These iconic civil rights leaders have lost most of their friends, but their hope endures. John Blake and Suzanne Malveaux, CNN, 6:34. CNN, 6:34 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, May 24, 2021. We lost civil rights icons. They lost friends. These iconic civil rights leaders have lost most of their friends, but their hope endures. John Blake and Suzanne Malveaux, CNN, 6:34 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, May 24, 2021. We lost civil rights icons. They lost friends. The Reverend Jesse Jackson. Zernona Clayton, and Andrew Young are some of the last remaining members of a generation of civil rights activists who reshaped the U.S. and challenged their country to become a genuine multiracial democracy. But they are also survivors who have witnessed some of their closest friends in the movement die during a sobering stretch over the past year. John Lewis, the Reverend C.T. Vivian, the Reverend Joseph Lowry, Vernon Jordan, all towering figures, all now gone. There's still a few of us around, but not really many, says Young, who was one of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s most trusted advisors. When a few of us get together, we always start with the song, "By and by, when the morning comes, all of the saints of God will gather home. We'll tell the story of how we've overcome, and we'll understand it better by and by." The three icons can't help but be reflective for another reason. As the nation marks the one-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, these leaders are taking stock of how Floyd's death has transformed America, and how so much change is still needed. In recent interviews with CNN's Suzanne Malveaux, the three offered their perspectives on Floyd's death and addressed a new generation of activists, who may be dismayed that more progress hasn't been made since last year. But given their personal losses, conversations also drifted into other topics. Their memories of their departed friends, how they approached their own mortality, and why they're still hopeful about the future. Andrew Young, freedom is a constant struggle. Former Ambassador Andrew Young, Rep. John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, right to left, at a conference in 2014 in Atlanta. David Tullis. AP. A remarkable moment occurred when Young, the former U.S. The world is reopening. Time is a flat circle. Friends is back on TV, and society, or at least the trio of Jennifer Lopez, Ben Affleck, and Diddy, has decided to fully lean into the chaos of living in an era that's not our own. The most recent iteration of celebrity time travel is Diddy's Thursday afternoon Instagram post, which features an image of him and Lopez holding hands. Apple News Plus, Read Esquire, and so much more. Get started. Plan Adware News for $9.99 a month until canceled. Diddy's Instagram of Jennifer Lopez is proof that time is now moving backward. If Diddy can invoke the past with his photo and hashtag, then the rest of us can manifest a trip in the space-time continuum. By Justin Kirkland, May 27, 2021. The world is reopening. Time is a flat circle. Friends is back on TV, and society, or at least the trio of Jennifer Lopez, Ben Affleck, and Diddy, has decided to fully lean into the chaos of living in an era that's not our own. The most recent iteration of Esquire. Apple News Plus. Read Esquire and so much more. Get started. Plan outdoor news for $9.99 a month until canceled. Esquire. Apple News. Read Esquire. Get started. Plan outdoor. Diddy's Instagram. If Diddy can invoke. By Justin Kirkland. The world is reopening. Time is a flat circle. Friends is back on TV, and society, or at least the trio of Jennifer Lopez, Ben Affleck, and Diddy, has decided to fully lean into the chaos of living in an era that's not our own. The most recent iteration of celebrity time travel is Diddy's Thursday afternoon Instagram post, which features an image of him and Lopez holding hands from their dating days back in 2000. The caption TBT. Nothing else. The post lit up the internet, with commenters chiming in with things like "Don't get me excited" and "Bye." Ben Diddy's post comes on the heels of the ongoing nostalgia fest that has been dubbed Bennifer 2.0. Ben Affleck and Lopez, who famously dated from 2002 to 2004, have been spotted together several times over the past month. Hanging out in the wake of Affleck's separation from actress Ana de Armas and Lopez's split with Alex Rodriguez. Desperately needing something inconsequential to focus on, we've all been vibing like it's 2002 again. So why not dial it back a couple years to 2000? More from Esquire on Apple News. Bob Dylan. The photos. Hey, I get it. Times were, mostly, simpler back then. We survived Y2K. No one had ruined the allure of McDonald's monopoly. Lopez was riding the high of On the 6. And we were blasting Diddy's Satisfy You. Featuring, well, let's just say we were blasting Satisfy You, okay? And yes, the two of them got arrested the year before for possession of a weapon after leaving the scene of a nightclub shooting. But that's turn-of-the-century shit, baby. It was a good time to be alive, I say. For the rest of the year, let's keep turning the clock back a little at a time. Let's start Friends over. Give me those golden years where Demi Moore and Bruce Willis ruled the world. For God's sake, give me a Julia Roberts rom-com. Let's keep running from reality, damn it. If Diddy can invoke the past with a photo and a hashtag, then the rest of us can manifest a trip in the space-time continuum. More from Esquire. Esquire, who's hornier you or everyone else? 9 weeks ago. Apple News Plus. Esquire. Youth Baseball's most infamous dad war 6 days ago. Apple News Plus. Esquire in the fight to save American democracy. Joe Manchin is Neville Chamberlain. 16 hours ago. Related stories. The New Yorker. The death of Hahnemann Hospital. 5 days ago. Apple News Plus. Women's health. How to stop procrastinating. Calm down. And live in the moment 6 days ago. Apple News Plus. Vogue. Rihanna proves loafers go with truly anything. Even lingerie. 2 days ago. Back to the present. Wish you had a DeLorean time machine to whisk you to earlier today? Constantly feeling up against the clock has become nothing short of a psychological epidemic. Reclaim your joy and live in the nowish with this wisdom. By Marissa Gainsbourg. Every day, even on weekends, I set 3 alerts within 15 minutes of each other to ensure I'm out of bed by my real alarm. For dates, weddings, and big work meetings, I carve out 2 hours for getting ready. Not because I need 2 hours, nowhere close really, but because I can't stand the feeling of being rushed. And the only days I ever spend in bed are the ones when I'm too sick or hungover to move. Otherwise, I have to be doing something. I have an obsession with time, or more specifically, anxiety about the inevitable lack of it. Turns out, I'm not alone. People who lead very meaning-driven lives tend to struggle with the idea of wasting time, be it theirs or someone else's, says primary care physician Alexa Kerman, MD, co-author of The 10 Worlds, The New Psychology of Happiness. Experts call this time anxiety, and it's a fixation on the passage of time, he explains. It can take a few different forms. You might have an inability to sleep in, feel stressed by uncontrollable time sucks, even when you have nowhere to be, or worry about showing up late to anything and everything. When you base your happiness and success on your ability to be purposeful, to add value.
In the weirdest year of our lives, the rise of Kathy Wood is hardly the weirdest thing to happen. But still, She's the first star in an industry, the $6.3 trillion world of exchange-traded funds, that wasn't supposed to have any. She's a throwback, a money manager who's actually famous among regular investors like Peter Lynch or Warren Buffett. And not only is she the first woman to play that role, she's taken a throne in the pantheon of meme stock demigods, up there with the Elon Musks and Shiba Inus. Wood moves stocks with her trades and her tweets. On social media and in online forums around the world, her name is synonymous with a certain brand of technophilia, an enthusiasm for the next best thing, whether that's robotics or gene editing or digital currencies. Some of her bolder predictions for Bitcoin and Tesla came true, to the shock of Wall Street analysts who found them ridiculous. The company she founded, ARK Investment Management, went from an unprofitable niche operator to a runway success in just a few years. Her flagship ARK Innovation Fund gained almost 150% in 2020, then as much as 26% more in the new year. Droves of investors, many of them young novices, bet on Wood, pouring almost $21 billion into ARK in 2020. In the depths of the pandemic, she championed a beautiful future where technology would make everything better and more profitable. It was part of a rising subculture of belief in both technological change and financial risk-taking that reached a fever pitch in the dark winter of 2021. Stocks soared even as the coronavirus carnage mounted. Joblessness, business closures, deaths. Retail traders with stimulus checks shocked hedge funds by bidding up GameStop and other meme stocks. Wood's swift ascent was emblematic of a struggle playing out in financial markets, where investors, giddy over the promises and entertainment value of innovations such as cryptocurrency, seemed to be winning out over skeptics. Dogecoin, created as a joke, surged 20,000%. Sooner or later, the market was bound to turn on her. Vaccinations accelerated and the economy reopened. Investors responded by turning from speculative high-tech stocks toward boring ones that would benefit from a broader recovery. Wood's flagship fund gave up all its 2021 gains and then some. As broad stock indices continued to climb, she went from having one of the best performances among money managers to losing money year to date. She blamed fears of inflation for sending the innovation-oriented part of the stock market, her bread and butter, into a correction. Tesla tumbled more than 30% from its peak, the same amount Bitcoin fell in one shocking morning in mid-May. Wood's always online fans are sticking by her. Investors who poured a net $34 billion into ARK's 8 funds in the past 12 months have withdrawn only about $1.2 billion since the end of February. They're betting that the world emerging from COVID-19 will catch up to the future she proselytizes for. To the true believers, her sudden fame won't be an oddball footnote in market history like GameStop, but a forerunner to decades of glorious change. Just as Mary Meeker cheered early internet companies Yahoo and Priceline.com as a Morgan Stanley analyst during the dot-com boom, Wood preaches a peculiarly American gospel of utopian change powered by capitalism. She drives home her message with repetition. "We have a 5-year investment time horizon," she says over and over again, especially when her funds are dropping in value. Other Kathy catchphrases get emblazoned on ARK merchandise sold to the company's more devoted clients, with all profits going to charity. A t-shirt reads, "Truth wins out." A baby onesie says, "Invest in the future today." She spreads the word in a steady stream of videos, webinars, and commentaries posted on ARK's website, along with frequent appearances at conferences and on media including CNBC, Bloomberg TV, and a variety of investing podcasts. Despite this, ARK turned down requests for an in-depth interview for this story. As Wood and her company's research frequently remind investors, electrification, the telephone, and the internal combustion engine turned the world upside down a century ago. Now, she tells anyone who will listen, 5 technologies: artificial intelligence, blockchain, DNA sequencing, energy storage, and robotics are bringing about an equally profound transformation of the economy. These innovations will converge, recombine into things like autonomous taxis and whatnot, and create a perfect economic storm of higher wages, falling prices, and wider profit margins. That leads to virtuous cycles of more investment in faster innovation. It's a lot. And it may be familiar to anyone who remembers that other spasm of tech stock fever, the dot-com bubble. But Wood's got a riff ready for that too. The dream was right. It was just 20 to 25 years too early, she often says. Now, the seeds are beginning to flourish. We are ready for prime time. In some ways, Wood is an unlikely evangelist for change. She's 65 and conservative, both politically and economically. For decades, she's championed green investments, but she rarely uses the terms climate change or clean energy. After donating $1,000 to elect Donald Trump in 2016, she gave $25,000 to his presidential campaign and associated Republican political action committees in 2020, Federal Election Commission records show. Her mentor is Arthur Laffer, the 80-year-old economist who's pushed his tax-cutting philosophy on Republican presidents since Ronald Reagan. Ideas
Esquire. Reheat leftovers. Revolutionize eggs. Fry fish. Maiden's carbon steel wok is a marvel. By Kevin Sintumalong, May 28, 2021. Shop. $99. MadineCookware.com. Welcome to the Esquire endorsement. Heavily researched. Thoroughly vetted. These picks are the best way to spend your hard-earned cash. Not going to lie, the microwave is the most used tool in my kitchen. How? I blame modern life. Sometimes I just don't have the energy at the end of the day to do anything but heat up some frozen Trader Joe's meal for my family and open a bottle of wine, ideally screw top. Thanks! But when I'm feeling less lazy, I fire up the wok, which is the second most used piece of gear in my kitchen. Short of the microwave, there really is no way to cook vegetables faster. And the tastiness to speed ratio is much higher. From spinach to kale, cauliflower to broccolini, the wok can cook it in minutes. That's the nature of the wok. It excels at healthish, high-heat, flavorful cooking, done quickly. It inspires me to cook because I know I'm going to be done in no time and it'll be dead simple to clean. Dishes are another story. There are a ton of woks to choose from. But the Maiden carbon steel wok has become one of my favorites because of its durability and simplicity and just right size. I practically never put it away. Maybe I should, but hey, as noted, I'm not going for perfection in the kitchen. It heats up and cools down quickly. The key to wok cooking is heat responsiveness. You want something that can lightly brown chop garlic on medium, and then quickly hit high temp when you throw in some egg noodles. The Maiden wok can do that, because it's made out of carbon steel, which takes high temperatures like cast iron, but heats up and then cools down faster. And it's lighter. Unlike some woks, you won't need Popeye forearms to make fried rice. More from Esquire on Apple News. There are great herds of scapegoats shielding Donald Trump from consequences. Shop. $99. MadineCookware.com. It's virtually nonstick. The other magical thing about carbon steel is that, once you've done the initial seasoning, Maiden makes it super easy with its seasoning wax. It gains a glossy patina over time. The more you use it, the more seasoned it becomes. It's one of the few pieces of equipment that legitimately gets better over time. Sure, there are non-stick woks out there coated with Teflon and other things, but they tend not to be able to take high heat, which is crucial to wok cooking, and they prevent you from using metal tools, which is kind of crucial to wok cooking. And those with so-called natural non-stick coatings can wear out over time. Don't bother with any of them. This one will last. You'll use it every day. It's time to stop thinking of the wok as that specialized piece of equipment that you only pull out when doing some sort of stir-fry. It can be a true utility player. Use it a lot like you would a frying pan. Use it to sear meats. Use it to steam a whole fish or vegetables. Use it to scramble eggs. Use it to make fresh popcorn. Use it to make Thai-style fried eggs with a crisp bottom and a soft, creamy yolk. Kai Dao, as a style egg is called in Thai, is a true game changer if you are bored of tepid sunny side-ups. Use it to heat up any leftovers that can be tossed around a bit. Somehow leftovers just magically taste better when they pop out of a wok. Time to give that microwave a rest. Shop. $99. MaddineCookware.com, photography and prop styling by Ali Holloway and Timothy Mulker. Want the latest on our editor's favorite gear? Subscribe to Esquire Select. More from Esquire on Apple News. I can understand why the cyber ninjas IT guys ran for the hills. More from Esquire. Esquire. Golf's dress code has finally been disrupted. 6 days ago. Apple News Plus. Esquire. Johnny Manziel's pro golf dreams were born in the desert. 6 days ago. Apple News Plus. Esquire. Why everyone wants one of Scotty Cameron's putters. 6 days ago. Apple News Plus. The Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal. The pizza business is divided on delivery. Pizza restaurants' relatively low food preparation costs mean they can often better afford to pay drivers. By Heather Haddon. Photographs by Audra Melton for The Wall Street Journal. May 30, 2021, 5:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. It's the great pizza delivery debate, to app or not to app. The industry that pioneered delivery food is divided on whether to make its pies available through apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats in addition to their own delivery services. As pizza chains look to maintain growth after the pandemic, some are working with the apps to reach new customers or add delivery capacity, while others say the services cut too far into their margins. Papa John's International Incorporated has struck deals with the major delivery apps to promote its restaurants online and use their drivers at times. Chief Executive Rob Lynch said his chain is advertising to reach consumers who got a taste for delivery during the health crisis, including those searching for pizza on DoorDash and other delivery apps. It's profitable or we wouldn't be doing it, Mr. Lynch said of sales through delivery apps. Papa John's app. The pizza chain uses major delivery services at times. Domino's Pizza Incorporated refuses to work with delivery apps, saying their fees dilute restaurant profits and distance chains from their customers. Over the last 5 years, Domino's and other pizza chains have gained market share from independent slice shops by offering cheaper pies and delivery with their own drivers. A shift that accelerated during the pandemic and sent Domino's shares up 31% last year. Domino's and Papa John's U.S. same-store sales grew by double-digit percentages last year. Pizza Hut is using delivery with app companies in limited circumstances, typically when its own drivers are busy with other orders, said Kevin Hochman, interim U.S. president for the chain. It is also working to keep customers ordering from its stores, which he said have faster average delivery times than the apps do, particularly in the suburbs where companies like Grubhub Incorporated are building out driver networks. At Papa John's in Hampton, GA pizza chains have fared much better than independent pizzerias during the pandemic. He said it is also usually cheaper to order directly from Pizza Hut than most other cuisines on an app. When you start adding up the delivery fee and the menu markup, it's a much more expensive proposition, Mr. Hochman said. Similar debates are playing out across the restaurant industry, where businesses are pushing back on the commissions charged by delivery apps or are developing ways to keep more control on customer orders. One edge for the pizza business is its low costs. Pizza, since it is mainly dough, sauce and cheese, is generally cheaper to make than many other types of food. Pizza restaurants are often left with more profit to pay drivers and other overhead costs than restaurants that specialize in other cuisines and rely on delivery companies, industry executives said, speaking at a Wall Street Journal event earlier this month. Investor Bill Ackman said his Pershing Square Capital Management LP fund took a nearly 6% stake in Domino's because it owns its delivery service and doesn't rely on companies such as DoorDash Incorporated. Delivery apps can help pizza chains expand their business, but at the expense of profit margins. You can deliver pizza for $7.99. It's hard to do that with a delivery service taking a massive cut of the proceeds, Mr. Ackman said. An Uber Eats spokeswoman said the company offers a range of pricing structures for different services and that globally more than 50,000 pizza restaurants use its platform. Slice, the pizza-specific startup, is trying to compete with the big apps. The company charges $2.25 to process an online order for an independent restaurant, amounting to a roughly 6% commission on a typical order of $40. Most of the 16,000 independent pizzerias on its service do their own deliveries, but Slice negotiates fees based on the operator's size to transport pies for the small business. Founder Ilya Sela said, "It's the most critical decision that any independent business can take, to transform digitally," said Mr. Sela, who aims for his online pizza network to compete with Domino's. Domino's has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on digital infrastructure including a proprietary sales system and GPS order tracking. It is testing on-the-road delivery with robots at one Houston store. Many Americans want fast, accurate delivery after trying more of it during the pandemic, raising the bar for restaurants, said Dennis Maloney, Domino's chief innovation officer. We think their expectations around delivery are just going to continue to grow, he said. Pizza is second only to burgers as America's most popular entree ordered from restaurants.
The Gospel of Kathy Wood. A few months